Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of the Reset Podcast. I am your host, Laura Munoz, CEO of the experience agency D-Flash. Each week, I bring on a great new business leader who's doing game-changing work, and this week is no different. I'm so excited to have Anne Devereux-Mills, founder of the Parlay House and serial entrepreneur, and we'll talk about changing the world for women, doing great work, and how she got there and all the stories behind it. It's going to be a great conversation. Take a listen. Hey, Anne.
Hey, Laura.
So it's so great to have you in New York. Like, I know that it's rare to get you in town, so we're psyched to have you.
I'm psyched to be here. It's not that rare. I still think I'm a New Yorker at heart. Spent 30 years here, so it's still home, at least part-time.
So that would mean that you've left here when you were 10?
I left home when I was 3.
Makes
prodigious
sense.
Runaway.
Yes. These are things to do. So as you know, the podcast, I always ask the same first question, and I'm always fascinated to see where the answers lie. And I bet yours is going to be no different. So, Anne, what was your first job?
My first job was teaching sewing at the Stitch and Time Sewing Center in Seattle, Washington, when I was 16 years old. And I was teaching people how to make beanbag frogs. I worked there. I measured fabric. I sold fabric. I worked on patterns, helped people. I still have a sort of fashion obsession to this day. But my job was teaching frog making, beanbag stuffing sewing class.
Oh my gosh!
First time you've heard that, huh?
That is a first. Wow. So how good are you at sewing?
I made my prom dress. I made my confirmation dress. I still dabble, but it's one of those. If I could have done it again, would I have gone into some sort of design? Yeah, maybe. But it's just become the thing that I love to do, and not the thing that over the years supported me or sustained another piece of me.
Wow. Okay. So small world. My mom is the world's greatest sewer, as in she made all of my dresses. Till now, she still does.
That's amazing.
Whenever we had for 6 years doing our DF events, my mom made all of those dresses that were red. But she lives in Florida, so I would send her a picture, and then she'd take the picture and make the dress, and then ship it up.
And were you happy with it?
Always.
I mean, your mom's listening, so you probably don't have to answer that.
I would tell her it was bad. Mom, not my style. But no, I would say 98% of the time, perfect. And I was like, you've noticed I've lost weight. How do you even know this? She's like, FaceTime. I'm like, this is true.
Smart mom.
So, but I always was fascinating to me how the idea of sewing, had that level of concentration and detail that my mom knew how to do, and I bet that's coming very handy for you as well.
It's totally true, and I've thought a lot about the idea of flow and what does it mean to get into your sweet spot so that the time just sort of speeds by. And if you ask me a question about when are you in your element, getting lost in a creative project, I would stay up till 3 or 4 in the morning to finish the outfit that I wanted to wear to school the next day. I'd have no idea that time had passed. I was just in that zone.
Yeah, it's me. Meanwhile, can I sew a button? Yes. Anything else? No.
Well, you had someone else doing it for you. You can also create a circuit board yourself. You're doing fine.
Yeah, it's all good. My mom laughs at me. She's like, at some point you'll learn how to sew a zipper. I'm like, that's what you're for.
And zippers are hard.
Yeah, they're really hard.
Yeah.
So, and what is it you do now?
Well, what I do now is run a global organization that I founded at a major life inflection point. It's called Parlay House. We're currently in New York and San Francisco and Oakland and London and LA, and this September coming to DC and Boston. And what we do is meet once a month to bring the most diverse group of women together to talk about the things that we don't have other safe spaces to talk about. So it's about connecting with people outside of your bubble. It's about having conversations that are vulnerable and intimate and finding the truths that you don't find when you introduce yourself by what you do for a living. And so I'm really trying to reframe those conversations away from what we do towards who we are, what we've experienced, what we aspire to, what we care about.
Awesome. So How does Anne go from sewing her school stuff to creating this global force? What's that journey like?
Well, the journey was meandering. I went to Wellesley and maybe should have studied art history, but I studied political science and economics and was looking for a job in 1984, which was not such a great economic time for this country. And I had written my honors thesis on political risk and third world investment. What you do with that, I didn't really know, but I got a lead to the insurance industry. And I found myself as a, brainy, feminist female working in, at that time, an incredibly masculine, sexist industry, doing something that was so far from my creative essence, so far from sewing, that I hated it. It was so bad of a fit for me. And so I spent the first probably 10 years of my career iterating. I did that for a while. After I had taken the job, about 6 months in, I was working in the political risk insurance department, which provided insurance for companies that were going to invest in, whether it was developing nations or conflict heavy areas. And my boss quit. And I found myself at 22 years old, maybe 23 years old, running this little international department. Well, I didn't like insurance. I was terrible at it, actually. But what I did like were some of the components. Some of the non-traditional creative thinking. We were global, so I got to travel all the time. I was good at doing the communications pieces, the newsletters, telling the rest of the company what this quirky little department was doing. And so I started to pay attention to the things that worked for me as opposed to the things that didn't, and iterated those first into the world of corporate communications, which I did much better at, but it felt a little too limited. And then I iterated to the world of advertising through corporate communications. And I sort of said to my clients, I love working with you, but I would love to be doing something broader. And they introduced me to their ad agency. And when I was 8 months pregnant, someone gave me a shot and hired me, an 8-month pregnant mom, to start learning the world of advertising, and that's where it all clicked. And so the majority of my career before I founded Parlay House was running and building advertising agencies for some of the big holding companies here in New York.
Awesome. And so how do you spend the bulk of your career, because you're now an advertising executive, and how does that all get you to Parlay House?
Well, it actually was the opposite of that got me to Parlay House. So I, had this terrific career. I ended up getting out of a pretty terrible, dangerous, abusive marriage and becoming a single mom, raising 2 amazing daughters. And I was leading this crazy life. I would get up at 4:45 in the morning, living in New Jersey. I would drive into Manhattan. I would walk across town in my 4-inch heels. I would get to the gym, work out, get to the office at 7:30, run a company, and then draw the line and say, I want to be a mom, because this is when all the important stuff happens, is at the dinner table and those conversations about the day. And so I would leave at 6 and go home and be a mom and get back online. And I did this for many, many, many years. And, in parallel to that story, when you're living that hard of a life, and based on the cards you get dealt, I found myself a multiple-time cancer victim. I guess you call it victim. But certainly experienced that and had some major surgeries. But got through it, just sort of compartmentalized those things, as you have to, because I didn't have a choice. And I found myself, as my girls got older, my oldest one went off to college. My second daughter was nearing college time. I found that I had a little more free time than I'd had when I was full-on mom, because they were more and more independent. And so I helped start a school in Uganda with some really smart people who were trying to change and break the cycle of poverty in a small town outside of Uganda. And I went to Uganda to check in on the school. My oldest daughter was teaching there for the summer, and I got a call from my oncologist who had been following up with me after my last surgery for a number of years, and he said, doesn't look so good. Your last biopsy came back, and you need to have some major surgery, so can you please come home, and we're going to have some major surgery. So this was 2010, depth of the recession. I was running a turnaround, not a startup. I'm definitely a startup person. But I thought, okay, here we go again. I'm tough. I can deal with anything, and I walked into my boss, for whom I had started 4 different advertising agencies, and I said, been through this before, I'll go through this again, I'm going to take off a couple weeks, and I'll be back, and I'll run the company, and this is just what we'll do. And it didn't happen in a split second, but essentially the conversation unfolded, and he said, don't hate me for this, I'm going to have someone else run the company. And in the blink of an eye, I lost my health, I lost my job, and my last kid, who was part of my self-definition, was leaving to go to college, and I was facing an empty nest. So I went from top of the success chain, multiple times CEO, to nothing. Well, almost nothing. I had been dating a really cute guy who lived in California. We were dating long distance, and luckily he was still there for me when everything else fell apart. But I really went from my identity being CEO and mom to what the hell am I doing and what's important to me. And it was really interesting. I went and I had the surgery, and my boyfriend, who's now my husband, was super supportive, and I got through it. But it gave me a chance to think about, okay, what do I do now? Do I just, pull my shoes back on and go and get another job and run another company? And I looked at what happened when I was out having the surgery. And those hundreds and even thousands of people that I had worked with, either they had worked for me, I had worked with, they were in the industry, they were not there for me when I was not in power anymore. I was really alone. I had a few really great girlfriends who were super supportive, my family's supportive, but I was quite alone in that experience. And I thought, these relationships that I'm in when I'm slugging it out are transactional. If I can't do things for people, they're not there for me. And that didn't feel good. And so I really, I was about to turn 50 years old, and I had to stop and think about, okay, how do I want to frame the next chapter of my life? What's my reset? And my reset started to become clear when I thought about the positive experiences, the times, I have 2 sisters who I'm very close with. I had 2 daughters. I went to Wellesley, where I had really intimate connections with people, where we were super supportive of each other. And I was lucky enough to be a fellow at the Aspen Institute, where I spent a couple of years in a cohort with 20 people, 20 of us, who were all very different. We were at different ends of the political spectrum, public sector, private sector, American, not American, male, female. But by sharing experiences together, reading the classics, listening to a piece of music, we could have intimate conversations among strangers. And I thought, that's where the real connections for me had happened, were in those situations. And I've been in a lot of work environments where women were pitted against women rather than really understanding who we are at a level that doesn't have anything to do with job, but has to do with both the common and uncommon things we face that are much easier to handle when we are connected to other humans. So I just started experimenting, and I invited a few friends of friends. I moved out to San Francisco, which is a big part I omitted from this story, because when David said, what are you going to do now? And he was living in California and I was living in New York, I had nothing holding me to New York anymore. And so I just sort of hopped on a plane and gave up everything that was to try to figure out what could be next. And I started experimenting in our new home in San Francisco, literally having 10 strangers, women who were friends of friends, into my home. And I had another person who I knew not so well, but I knew her enough, who is a poet, and talked about how poetry can be accessible to people, because usually it's kind of intellectual and hard to grasp for everybody, and people think there's a right and wrong answer to interpretation. So we just sort of talked about it. It wasn't incredibly intimate as our first conversation, but it showed that when we had someone framing a conversation, people who didn't know each other could start to have conversations, and those led to friendships. Not about poetry, just about what's underneath the conversation. And it turned out that when I would invite strangers to my home and they would connect with other new people, sparks would fly that echoed super broadly. It could have resulted in someone getting a job, but it also could result in her not feeling alone, or for her thinking about something she'd never thought of, or talking about an experience. This is before Me Too. So we were having Me Too-like conversations before #MeToo was a thing, because we're all starving for intimacy and connection. and friendships. And so, we're now 5,000 plus members in the US and London, with lots of opportunities to continue to expand, because my unmet need, me feeling isolated and not knowing how to talk about myself if it wasn't job or family, was other people's truths too. So I'm now on a mission to create environments where people who might not have met and connected have the opportunity to meet and connect.
Well, yeah, as a proud card-carrying member of Parlay House and ending up making an awesome friend who is now my neighbor, as a result, I can attest to the power of what the comfort is. I think there's something really unique, and it's also it's true that women are actually starving for this, because it's so hard to be Laura who runs business, Laura who does this, and all. But there's like 8 different versions of me. Right. So when you get
in the hierarchy, you're generally the caregiver, I'm guessing. We all are.
We all are.
We're taking care of everybody around us, and there's not much time for us to be taken care of. So one of the things we do at Parlay House is we serve lovely wine or champagne and nice food, and at least for one day each month, if you choose to be part of it, you're not at the bottom of the totem pole of care. We're caring for each other.
Well, that's the thing I think is so important, that, having these spaces where women can just be themselves. Mm-hmm. Because I find as I move up the chain in terms of the echelon I end up in, that we have less and less time. Yeah. And we're putting ourselves behind. And that's just not where you need to be. And so having somewhere like Parlay House is so valuable, because you're able to meet women from different walks of life who are in different stages and just want to be open. That's the key for a lot of this stuff. And I think it's, especially in this current climate where everyone's like, what do we do? Between the politics of now and Me Too happening, that it's very difficult for women to be like, okay, I just need to be.
Right.
It's definitely a different side of the house. So now that you're 5,000 people strong, what is sort of the goal for the next round of Parlay House?
Well, I'm hoping that by talking about it, and I'm working on a book which will be coming out in the new year, that provides both insights about my journey, but also helpful hints about how to get something started that's meaningful for you. I'm hoping there become Parlay Houses for women all over the world, and at some point to include men in these safe conversations. I don't think we as a society are at a place now where we're on equal footing to have these safe conversations, but I'm hoping we're going to get there. It's funny, I guest teach a class at the Holt International School of Business on gender issues. And 3 years ago when I started teaching the class, there were no men in the class, and it was all just a women-to-women conversation. And the next year, there were a couple of gay men in the class, and they actively participated in the conversation. And this last year, a couple months ago when I finished, the class was 50-50.
Wow.
And that was super meaningful to me, because it said, and these are not American men for the most part. They were from India and from China and from, all over the world. And it was fascinating. After I told my pretty vulnerable life story, the very first question was from a man from rural India who said, "This is great, but I don't have anyone to talk to intimately, and I need to learn to have these conversations. So when are you launching Parlay House for Men?" And it was very, we think of sort of entitled, privileged men and their inner circles, but when you think about the world, there are a whole lot of people who feel other and don't have safe places to talk. And, if I am doing my part in making conversations that didn't used to be public, open conversations more comfortable to have with a broader range of people, I feel I've left an important...
Happy holidays, Reset listeners. I've got something special for you just in time for the holidays. It's from our friends over at Masterclass. What's Masterclass? Well, Masterclass lets you learn from the best with online courses taught by masters of their craft. So you get everything from Shonda Rhimes teaching about TV writing, Anna Wintour teaching about creative leadership, Don von Fosterberg talking about building a fashion brand, which is totally interesting considering our conversation today with Kim Jenkins. And my personal favorite, we've got Serena Williams, who teaches tennis. So I just took this course, and it's pretty amazing. amazing. There are over 60 instructors with tons of categories. There's literally something for everyone. If you've ever wanted to learn something by the best people in the world, this is the app for you. So now, for a limited time only, when you buy one annual Masterclass All Access Pass membership for yourself, you get another one to give for free. So think about the people who are so hard to buy for. This is a gift for them. So just go to masterclass.com/reset to get started with a limited time offer. Buy one All Access Pass and get one as a free gift. So go ahead, check it out. Masterclass.com/reset. Happy holidays. The climate now for vulnerability has actually become the thing. And I think that 3-4 years ago, if you talk about vulnerability, it was a woman's thing. And I think there's definitely been a shift where more and more men are now saying, oh, I can talk about, mental illness, family issues, their own struggles. The idea of what self-care means to them has all sort of now begun to kind of crack open. And that's when this starts to get better, because we're all human. And I think we've gone through a phase where everyone's become an Autobot.
Yeah.
You just work. The hustle 24 hours a day, and if you're not up doing that, then you're missing out. And that sort of pervades our society for the last 10, 15 years, and it did huge damage. And now that we're kind of coming out of it, it's okay. What are some ways we can break these cycles? How can we start to be vulnerable and provide spaces for everyone to sort of learn from each other? And because once this guy named Corey Blake, who has a program called Vulnerability is Sexy, and the reason he so the reason and the reason that you talk about it is because if you say that, and all of a sudden guys don't think it's weird.
Right. frame it in terms of something that's meaningful.
Yeah. And you're like, wow, really? That's what we have to, okay, however frame it. But have the conversation. Well, it's
amazing how much tension you diffuse when you start off the conversation being vulnerable. It opens, it sounds risky, but it actually opens the door, and it is like a release that you can feel and hear in a room when someone is willing to say that first thing. Then everyone else has permission to admit and talk about and cry and be pissed, because there's a whole lot of these discussions that have to do with not just kind of namby-pamby positivity, but about things that piss us off.
Yeah.
And when you look at the challenges we have as a society, we need to have places to talk about those too, because that's when the action starts to happen.
Yeah, because if you don't talk about it, then it just sort of festers. Absolutely. And also, if you don't talk about it, then there's no way you can make a solution. And, I was saying to some friends of mine the other day about the elections. I was like, you can bitch and moan about how bad politics are, but what are you doing to help? It's like, are you putting your money behind candidates? Are you supporting nonprofits to do voter registration? Use your powers for good, and not think that just being angry and festering about that is going to solve any problem.
Yeah, I write a monthly newsletter called One Small Thing, and I think in days like those that we face now, where the polarization of people in this country is so extreme, where the amount of anger on all sides is just untenable, it becomes overwhelming. How could I, as an individual, make a dent on these huge gaps and disparities in society? And One Small Thing is really about the cascade effect that can happen through one person connecting with another person and pulling them forward in some way that's easy for the giver, meaningful to the receiver, and then starts a cascade of good. And so, anybody who's interested can go on my Anne Devereux-Mills website and subscribe to One Small Thing, because I think we bring about sort of solutions-oriented, tiny conversations that don't make you give up your corporate job and go run a nonprofit or ask something that's just not
tenable.
It's small things that we can do that are truly meaningful for other people.
We'll definitely put that in the show notes so our listeners can subscribe, because it definitely is it doesn't. You don't have to change the world tomorrow. You can do one small thing. Can you make an introduction for somebody? I just did someone's reference, and it was sure.
Right. Can you teach them how to sew? Do you have baby clothes that your child's grown out of that someone else can benefit from? It might be a pay it forward in line at Starbucks, but I think it's more likely to be the transfer of skills or experience, or even best, listening, empathizing, identifying, confirming. Those things are so meaningful because all of a sudden the person feels seen and cared for.
Well, that's the thing. I think that, I try and spend, I usually do this on Fridays where it's like, I spend my 5 for 5 Fridays where I pick 5 people who I haven't talked to in a bit and trying to have coffee or a drink with them. And it's like half an hour little meetings, and I pick a nice hotel bar because Starbucks meetings are terrible. And I want to meet in my office. And we just connect. And it's like, hey, you popped into my thoughts. I thought it'd be great to have a conversation. And you're like, and what ends up happening is that you just get to hear from the person. And invariably some fun thing comes up. You did something fun, or there's been this thing going on, or a new opportunity might be coming your way. But I like to think of it as a great way to just keep people top of mind, because the more that you can just, oh, hey, great to hear from you. Because it does, oftentimes people just want to talk to someone.
Yeah.
And not about work, and it's like, hey, how you doing? Because we don't do that anymore as adults. I was saying to a friend of mine, how do we do our events? And I'm like, well, think about a sandbox. When we were little kids, we all got thrown in the sandbox as little kids. And it was like, oh, go play with Johnny. And all right, cool. And I didn't know anything about Johnny, but Johnny was sitting next to me in the sandbox. So, hi, you've got a blue shirt, I've got a red shirt.
He's got a bucket.
Yeah, I got a pail, we'll play. And that's how you made your first friends. It was there wasn't anything else there. And what ends up happening is just a little bit of magic. And so the same thing, when you create these experiences where people can feel vulnerable and feel good, little bits of magic come out of it. And so I think it's fantastic what you've been able to accomplish in such a short amount of time. And so do you think that there'll ever be multiple Annes in different places? Or?
Oh, there already are. There already are. In most of the cities, I run the New York and San Francisco locations myself, but in all the other cities, it's other women who also feel this is important, who also want to be sort of a catalyst for the strengthening of people and connections and ideas, and some of it's action-oriented and some of it's just feeling and some of it's being seen or learning. And, I try to vary content, as do the other leaders of Parlay House, so that one month it might be lighthearted and fun, and one it might be serious, and one it might be educational. And, when we have these varied experiences, it attracts a different subgroup every time. And so it's terrific because your world just expands and expands based on different facets of yourself that you're putting forward when you come to these events.
So cool. So what would you probably say to 25-year-old Anne?
I would say stop trying to be so damn perfect because it's impossible, and you'll just measure yourself up as a failure all the time. And talk about your failures as much as your successes, because that is a vulnerability that makes everyone else around you feel comfortable rather than intimidated. And I would also say that every decision you make is just one step in a very long life. So instead of being intimidated that you might be making the wrong decision, take a leap, try something, do your best at it. If it's right, you're going to have another leap in that direction. If it's wrong, there's going to be a super interesting sideways leap or around the corner leap. And you shouldn't be afraid of trying things, because I think life is a perpetual education and experimentation. And if you're worried that this might not be the right decision for my entire career, you're going to be paralyzed. And if you think this is something I'm interested in trying now, you're likely to be playing to something closer to your heart to start with, and the success likelihood is higher.
Wow. So 25-year-old Anne, we've gotten a lot of good advice. And, so we haven't talked about this a little bit before. So what do you think the New York versus San Francisco side of the universe is about? We've got female founders here, and then we've got female founders out there. Why is there such a big difference between the two of us?
That's a good question. I have been living in San Francisco for a while, but I'm not sure that I can generalize about the difference. I think there's an intensity about New York that is based on sort of the vibrance and close-packed nature of the city, the diversity of the people. San Francisco is not as diverse, or not diverse in the same way, not quite packed together, although housing is a huge problem. But, San Francisco, everybody is an entrepreneur, so it's less interesting because most people are. I think entrepreneurs in New York are slotted in side by side with people in finance and people in public services. And, there's just a range and a density in New York that brings out something different in people. And I like both halves of it. I mean, truthfully, I love my San Francisco depth because New Yorkers are often running so fast that we don't have time to be deep. And I love my New York intensity, and San Franciscans just don't have that same, for the most part, that same sort of relentless, exciting, electric drive. And I'm half and half. I need to have a foot in each place.
Yeah, I think the New York thing, I was saying this to someone earlier, is that like on every corner in New York City, there are a million stories, and you never. It's so unpredictable, which is why it makes it fascinating and makes it interesting. And there's nowhere else in the world except for New York where you can find that. You can be in a theater surrounded by 1,000 people, and every single person is there for a different reason and has a crazy story as to why they're sitting in that particular day, at that particular time, for that particular show, at that moment.
Yeah.
But it's just different, and I think that's what's the stories that people tell and the experiences they have just are much more varied here because we're such a crazy melting pot of a city. And so I love it, but also drives me crazy.
Well, what's interesting for me is, because I'm familiar with both cities, but now that we've expanded to, Oakland is different than San Francisco, and LA is way different. And, when we talk about it, who's hosting it, what the dynamics are like is different there than it is in London. And, we'll see what is it like to have Parlay House in Washington, D.C. and in Boston, which, we're heading to D.C. in the middle of, sort of a turning back of time for a lot of our nation, especially related to women's empowerment and diversity and all the things that Parlay House is about. And so I don't know what the dynamics and cadence of those cities is going to be like, and I'm sort of relearning our country as we roll out into different cities.
And how are you selecting the cities?
It's really the entire amazing thing about Parlay House is that I'm not selecting anything. The membership comes by one woman choosing to bring another woman forward. Once you're a member, you're empowered to make other people members, because membership just means, are you in? You want to be part of our circle. You can decide every month whether you care about the topic, whether you have time, whether you want to come. Mm-hmm. And so it's really member driven. Same thing about the women who choose to run the different city groups, is they say, yeah, I'm missing that in my life, and I have the capacity, the apartment or the house or the inkling that I want to be a core of making this happen in my city, and they come to me and say, I had a fascinating conversation in San Francisco recently. We had a gynecologist talk about the evolution of women's hormones through the course of your life and why you're feeling and experiencing different things, what you can do, what you can't do, what you should expect, the kinds of sort of intimate conversations we might have with a very close-knit friend or family member, but that you don't go talking about on a broad level. And there was a young woman there, and she was sort of listening keenly during this conversation. And afterwards, she came up to me and she said, I'm from Jordan, and I'm 32 years old. My mother probably wouldn't discuss these things with me ever, but certainly not as a single woman. If I was married, maybe I could ask her a question. And she said, and what's a pap smear? At 32.
Oh my gosh.
And she said, I think we probably need to have Parlay House in Jordan because no one's having these conversations. And so it's situations like that where I've had people who might be visiting say, I really need this in my city. How do I help it happen? And we have a whole, immersion kit to help people who want to start Parlay House get started and support their building of a list of interested people and figuring out programming and, probably in a similar way to the way that you think about building events for your big corporate clients, we do it for women.
That's incredible. I mean, one, Oh my God. 32 and never had prostate cheese.
32 and never talked about anything related to your body and your health and being a woman.
Well, it's
also, not unusual. I'm sure she's in the majority.
Oh, I'm sure she's in the majority.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Like, I was having a conversation with a girlfriend of mine the other day, and so she's in her late 40s and about to hit menopause, and so obviously I'm 12 years younger, so it's not in my wheelhouse. And she's like, I really wish there was somewhere where I could go and like talk to other women about this, because the friends I have who are like my friends from high school who are in that same kind of age bracket, they're far away, and it's interesting because you realize that you need groups of women who can cut across so many different spectrums, because like that's why you gotta talk about this stuff.
Exactly. And that was what this topic was. It was sort of about from reproduction through menopause, because none of us are. Everyone thinks they're the only one that's having a hard time getting pregnant, or who's worried that they're going to be too old before they find the right person,
blah, blah, blah.
Or who's having perimenopause and no one even tells them what the hell that is, or whose spouse is so pissed off because they are sweating at night and not into things that nobody's talking about any of this. And so I like to provide forums where all of a sudden we're not alone.
Because I think, especially as female entrepreneurs, as women in business, like again, we have to put on this mask of being superwomen, and we don't get a chance to actually sort of let the guards down and ask those questions. Do you think it's okay? And because also like we're sort of built to be like, that's not what we're gonna talk about. Black people have this perfect face and nothing can go wrong, and we can't show weakness because then men will step all over us, and it's like, no.
Right. And if we haven't totally broken down those barriers and gender norms in the work world, by at least on a private level starting to realize that we're all experiencing the same thing and finding tactics in our own worlds for making it a little bit easier on the next few people, it's not going to change. So we've got to start somewhere. This is where I choose to start.
Would you ever go back into advertising?
I think about it. I actually miss the camaraderie of creative teams and what it feels like to have a routine and to have a group of people and to be doing business based on creativity and creative ideas. I really miss that piece of it. But I don't miss the brutality. I don't miss the commoditization of creative products, which happens when instead of having marketing clients, you have procurement driving decisions. I don't miss the pressure to deliver high margins and the coldness that lawyers want you to have when you deal with having to downsize or there are a lot of things I don't miss, but I miss the culture. I miss being with highly creative people. So probably not, because I love what I'm doing now, but I do love the world of creativity a lot.
Well, and you're also creating something pretty awesome on a monthly basis around the world. So hey, it's different. Yeah. So, question for you: what does Anne do to chill out and relax? So this has sort of become like a popular thing with the show, where we sort of find out, where do you go for a drink? What's the thing that you sort of do to get away from everybody else and have that important me time? Because no matter what we're doing, it's really important for people to understand that, like, you've got to sort of take a break for you. Otherwise, you will fall into a giant hole.
Yeah, I totally agree. And, I will answer that in a few ways. There are things that I do on a daily basis that keep me from falling into the hole. So, I'm 57 years old. I don't look like it. And part of that is because I work out every day. And that is me time. When I go to the gym, I'm generally not sending emails and not on the phone, and I am, that listening to music and letting my mind wander. It's when the creativity happens. It's when some replenishment happens. So that's definitely a thing. If I can be in a place where instead of being at the gym, I'm on a paddleboard or, I'm something in nature, I would choose that. I don't get to do that every day, but when I do, that feels great. And the other thing I do is get back to being creative, where I'm in that zone, and it could be making a piece of jewelry, it could be doing a creative project, but I really can get so much. I don't even know what it is. It's not adrenaline, but it's that feeling of fulfillment from creating something, even if it doesn't turn out the way I want. It's the process, not the product. I always give away anything that I make because I don't really care about having it after. But I love. We were just on a family vacation, and my mother and my grandmother. I come from a sort of chain of creative women, and I remember my mom teaching us to do macrame. And when I was walking around, I was in Greece. I was walking around, and I was noticing macrame is kind of making a comeback. I thought, I wonder if I can still remember how to do that. So I bought some twine and some rope like for fishing boats, and I got sticks, and I went out and I created these macrame hangings that I left them behind in Greece. But the process of, do I remember, this triggers some positive memories of my childhood and of my family, and what can I create out of non-expensive materials in a way that engages me? And I literally could sit and do that for 3 hours and have no idea that it's time for dinner or whatever else, because I'm just in my zone. So those are the things that I do. Some are physical and some are creative.
Awesome. Well, Anne, it's been such a delight to have you on the show.
It's been so fun. Thank you for having me here.
Absolutely.
I love what you're doing. I love the idea of open conversations and resetting and figuring out what you'd do over again, and what you're happy that you did that way.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So we'll put all the information about Parlay House in our show notes. And so if you're interested in attending, and let me tell you, it fuels your soul in a way you didn't know you needed it to. So I highly recommend you give it a try. And that's our show.
Amazing.